Hi. Today we're going to be discussing a very important subject dealing with the American Criminal Justice Training Center. My name is James Freeman and I will be your instructor for today. Well, I tell you, when you add in the topics of ethics and personal discretion and law enforcement, and then you add that on top of our criminal justice system here in this country, I tell you what you have is a hodgepodge of various challenges for various reasons. For the last 11 years, I've been honored to be in law enforcement as a certified police chaplain as well as a police reserve officer. And I have the opportunity and the honor of serving five different police departments: East Point Police Department, St. Clair Shores Police Department, Roseville Police Department, Huntington Woods Public Safety Department, and New Baltimore Police Department, where I serve as both chaplain and reserve police officer. I have had the fortune or misfortune, I guess, depending upon who the person was, of being in court for several different instances from a law enforcement perspective. Sometimes it was for officers that I served with, and then other times it was to testify against other individuals. So I was able to witness and experience firsthand our criminal justice center system and how it works. And I can tell you, not only is it complex, extremely complex, it is extremely questionable in a lot of different areas, because, in my humble opinion, uh, you have two different factors that's working together. One is how things should go based on the law, the Constitution of our United States, the laws and ordinances of the individual states, policies and procedures of the individual police departments, public safety departments, sheriff departments, state police officers, as well as federal police officers. Now you're throwing into that context Homeland Security, ICE, DEA, ATF. I mean, we can go on and on and on as far as the myriad of law enforcement departments that are out there. You take in consideration just the process of our system, the individual county laws or individual locale laws, and then you take all the different players that come into play here. Anyone that's in the criminal justice system, it started out with an arrest by a law enforcement professional somewhere in law enforcement, be it local or federal. That's the starting point of it all. So somebody has done something, or the perception is that they've done something to violate one of the laws of the land, and that's where it starts. So you have the first player, which is the law enforcement officer, and then for the arresting officer, I should say. And then you got to look at was this a traffic stop? Was this a domestic violence call? Was this an investigation, multiple or multi-jurisdictional investigation that was taking place? Was this a drug bust, gang arrest, where you had different law enforcement systems that were in the process here? Then you have the detectives who basically take the case and run with it. So you have the arresting officer, you have the detective. Then you take in consideration you have the defense attorney, who is there to defend the accused at that particular point. And you have a myriad of different things that we'll discuss later on when it comes to that. You have the prosecuting attorney, uh, who really decides if the course is going to move forward or not. So then you got that whole hodgepodge. Was this a warrant arrest? A warrant was issued for the arrest of this particular individual, or was this a warrantless arrest, something that took place during a traffic stop or during a domestic violence call, or disturbing the peace charge, whatever. And so you add in all those different pieces in it. And then you have, if it reaches a court, a law, then you're talking about a referee, or you're talking about a judge. If it becomes a jury trial, now you're talking about 12 individuals that are peers of this particular individual that is accused, who have the say of yay and nay over if this person is going to do time or whether the case may be. So when you take a look at all these different things, and then you throw in ethics, starting with that arresting officer who has some level of discretion, and it varies from the department to department. I know police departments whereby the patrol officer has to get approval from his commanding officer or her commanding officer if to arrest or not arrest, to let go or advise or whatever. But a lot police officers, to a certain degree, in most departments, still have a high level of discretion that comes with their jobs, starting with a warrantless arrest or issued warrant arrest at that particular time. So now we're dealing with individual ethics when it comes to this. I always say ethics is like beauty; it's in the eye of the beholder, because there's no clear cut in most places, no clear cut designations of what's ethical and non-ethical. Every police department, every law enforcement department has a code of ethics that every officer is supposed to follow, or they have policies or procedures, SOPs, SOGs, rules of engagements, that ordinances that we have to follow when we are interacting with the public. However, you throw in that word discretion, and to a certain degree, that might change some of the policies or code of ethics that exist with a particular department. So you throw in ethics, and that officer's ethics might be somewhat different than the code of ethics of their different department. A good police officer is always going to attempt, which I hope I am, a good police officer is always going to do their very best. He or she is going to do their very best to uphold the oath of office and the ethics of their individual department or county or state or federal government. However, discretion does come into play at this particular time. There are certain departments here in Michigan where, even though marijuana is illegal, and I hope it stays that way from a personal note, if you're caught on a traffic stop with a certain amount of marijuana, then that patrol officer can either take it, throw it out, and advise you not to do it again and let you go. Where some departments, like my departments, you're going to get arrested, especially if you don't have a card, a medicinal marijuana card, or whatever the case may be. You're going to get arrested. So let's just say a traffic stop takes place, and that officer, that patrol officer, sees some drug paraphernalia, a bong, some other things that might signal that there is drugs in the car. There may be a strong sense of smell that's coming from the car of the usage of weed or marijuana. And the officer does due diligence by asking several searching questions. Has anybody been smoking any drugs? Is there any drugs in the car? Is there any weapons in the car that may hurt me, sir, ma'am? Do you mind if I search your car? Because now we have probable cause, reasonable suspicion, or there might even be some exigent circumstances where there's a passenger, or the driver alone, or driver and passenger, or one or two of the players in the car, where they're sweating profusely, extremely nervous, overly nervous for a simple traffic stop, along with the strong smell of marijuana in the car. So there could be a lot of different things that causes that officer to continue searching. At this point, if there's consent given, the officer, even if it's not consent, if there's a lot of if there's probable cause, reasonable suspicion, which is a little different than probable cause, or exigent circumstances, when that officer, as a law enforcement officer, I can proceed and continue. However, it's always good to get consent for the court. And if they consent for the search, and I ask them to get out of the car, and I'm not arresting but detaining at this particular point of time, and I start searching the car and I find drugs, then 9 out of 10 times in my departments, there's going to be an arrest that's going to take place. So it goes from me, and I pass it off to the detective. And of course, I'm still going to be part of the process, because eventually I'm going to have to go to court and testify myself as the arresting officer. However, it's going to go off to the detectives that's going to investigate even further. And once all the evidence is gathered together, it's going to go to the prosecuting attorney's office, who's going to make the decision that this particular individual or individuals should be charged with a crime, drug possession. If there's a high amount of drugs in the car, or if it's packaged a certain way, there might be the added charge of delivery that's on there. So it goes to the prosecuting attorney's office, who at that point decides to send forth a charge. If the charge is yay, then that person is either arrested and put in the system if they bailed out or whatever the case may be. Now, at this particular time, it's going to go to the court system. And once again, that whole ethical issue comes, probable cause, exigent circumstances. The challenge that I see is that you have the arresting officer's personal ethics. Could I have let the person go? Yeah, I guess I could have. But if the code of ethics in my department, the rules of engagements, or the policy says thou shalt arrest someone for having drugs, then that's going to happen. However, at the same time, you're dealing with all the different nuances that come into play, all the different players. Every player has their different rules and regulations or policies and procedures that they're following. So really what you're looking at here is how things should be, and then how things are. In the real world, how things are, and in the world that's perfect, how things should be. And I really believe that's how our court systems work, which causes this adversarial, confrontational aspect of defense and offense, of charging and defending someone and accusing someone, that causes this adversarial conflict that we have. The defense attorney has their own conflicting processes and procedures that they have to follow. The difference between having the ability of hiring your own attorney to defend you versus a public defender, for someone who might not have the financial ability to defend themselves. Someone put it this way, the way our criminal justice system is set up, you can afford having the best legal representation that one can afford. And I have found that to really be true and to really be the case. So you have that whole hodgepodge. A public defender that is dealing with multiple cases, overworked, overwhelmed, not able to give each case its own personal touch, or he or she's own personal touch. I have been representing or in court helping someone. I'm also a pastor, and one case in particular I remember where this gentleman who's a good man did something that was just foolish, but he was a good man, and did it without malice, and really the charge that was levied against him, I can really say, was wrong. It should have never even got that far. But anyway, he's meeting his public defender before he eventually hired his own attorney, which is what I suggested he do in the first place. And the public defender met him for the first time, spent 15 minutes with him, and had convinced him, just take a plea, it'll be okay, this will go away, you won't have that much to worry about. Well, I was there, and I was just there to support him and his wife, and I never heard mention the totality of what he could be facing. So at that point, I stood up in the court. We were at this particular court room, and I went over to him and to his wife, and I introduced myself to their attorney, this public defender, and I got permission from him and her, and I said, "Is it okay if I ask your attorney a question?" And they said yes. And I asked the attorney, I said, if he pleads to this, is he going to be on the sex registry list for the rest of his life? And the public defender, his body language dictated yes. And after 5 minutes of dancing around the question, he finally said, well, yeah, that's one of the things that's going to take place. And I shared with my member of my church and his wife, I said, then you do not plea. You are not guilty of this. Do not take this plea. I said, because you will be on the sex registry list for the rest of your life. I said, it's going to forever change your life, and you will be perpetually found guilty for something you did not do. I said, dump this guy, get your own attorney, so that you'll have somebody that's going to fight for you. And that's eventually exactly what he did, and he got off. He was found not guilty, which was the correct verdict. But here was this public defender that was going to jam him up for the rest of his life. So even attorneys, defense attorneys, they have their own challenges, rules and policies that they're going to follow, or ethical dilemmas. I thought it was unethical for this defense attorney, the public defender, to have this man plea out or cop out to a plea where he was not guilty, and never tell him, never once, and I listened to the conversation, he never once told my friend that he was going to be on the sex registry list for the rest of his life if he plead to this charge. I thought that was very unethical. So you have the attorneys who deal with this ethical battle, and then you have the prosecuting attorneys who deal with this particular battle. I ended up in court to testify for an officer, friend of mine, and who had, on videotape, had made some very disparaging remarks against minorities. But he was a good cop. I knew him personally. He had never made those statements to me, or never said anything to me like that. So I'm there testifying, I was subpoenaed, I was there testifying on his behalf. And the prosecuting attorney made a statement about minorities and things such as that. And from an ethical standpoint, I threw in a little jab there. They probably could have got in trouble for it. But the attorney made a statement to the degree that I was assisting this cop who she charged as being a racist and helping him. And my response to this prosecuting attorney, who happened to be Caucasian, my response to him is, how many minorities have you put in prison? How many minorities that are doing time right now because you decided to prosecute them even though you had evidence that they were innocent or maybe not guilty of that particular crime? And under the Innocence Project, I think we're beginning to see just a myriad of men and women, in some cases women, that have done, in some cases, decades of time in prison, and they were innocent. And because of science advancement, technology advancement, DNA advancement testing, these men are now being exonerated, and women are now being exonerated. But the problem is 10, 15, 20, 25 years, in some cases 30 years of their lives have been exhausted in the prison system. And then when you find out the evidence that was used against them, it was bogus, circumstantial at best. But these men were still charged and convicted and did time. So even with the prosecuting attorneys in, there is this ethical issue. With the judges, I know too many judges, and I'm very clear here, respectfully, that some judges have some challenges, man, and some real issues. So you have the ethical issue that comes with that, as they are the ones that are in charge of that courtroom. And then you have the jury system, where you have 12 men and women, peers, who may not have any law enforcement background or legal training or at all, but they're being asked to make a decision that is going to either bring freedom or incarceration to this person's life. And you have that whole argument that comes into play with that, and now you're dealing with perceptions and perspectives. Two people could see the same accident and have two different perceptions of what happened, two different testimonies of what took place. So our criminal justice system, in my opinion, is one of the best, but it still has very great amount of flaws, because we're dealing with two things: human error. Because we are involved as human beings, there's a different nuance that comes along with that. So I've approached this from more of an applicable real world standpoint versus maybe more of a clinical or academic one, but that's how my mind thinks. So I've enjoyed this time with you. Hopefully you got something out of this. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you on today. Thank you so much.